We've asked you to join us on this series in a time of fasting and prayer. We've asked you to fast one meal per week and dedicate that hour per week to kind of wrestle through a prayer journal here. The question last week was, will you show me how I can take ownership of this vision for our church? And I thought for 100 of you, it was real easy for you to take ownership last week because you kind of set aside everything to go all in and own what the task at hand was. And, really that's kind of what we're doing in a broader sense for our church. And so I hope you'll pick one of these up if you haven't gotten one already and just jump in right now for the last couple weeks of this series. We have Dan Cook with us. So many of you have asked, how you know this guy? And I met him several years ago because he was the first man from a business perspective that I kind of heard that same vision that God had resonated in my heart, even though he's coming from a different realm. And I thought, wow, I got to talk to this guy. And so we just kind of started line of communication. It's been over the last several years, and I'm really happy that he's here today. Dan, you come on up. Y'all give him a hand. And Dan leads a company called Building God's Way, and he's going to dive in to share a little bit with you about the journey that God has brought him on. And he's just part of the business side, the for-profit side of this, as well as leading us and helping us with the nonprofit side of this. And just looking really forward to the future that God has planned for us all. Right after this service, Dan and I will be leading a Q&A session as well. So if you got questions that you've had up to this point or new questions that come up to your mind today, feel free to stay after, and we'll just do that right over here in this area.
Thank you, Venture. It's so incredible to be here today. I've met many of your leadership in the number of times that we've been out here and part of the biblical entrepreneurship group that we had. And being able to come and speak here today is just a real joy. I'm very, very excited to be able to address you. I'm going to give you just a little bit of my background and talk about a specific project that we were involved in a number of years ago. I was not raised in a Christian home. In fact, only had really two experiences in a church in my growing up years, and one was I was baptized when I was 2 weeks old, and frankly don't remember that very well. The other is I was married in a church when I was 21, and so in between that, just very involved with a great family that we did a lot of things and pretty actively involved in hunting and fishing and hunting and all kinds of sports. And so it was fantastic growing up time in a little town in Montana called Butte, Montana. I always wanted to be an architect since about the 7th grade and did pursue that. And after doing that, eventually I became a general contractor. Did a lot of architectural and construction work in Montana and started developing buildings. Eventually started owning those buildings, and we really got pretty good at doing hospitality, hotel-type things. At one point, owned half a dozen different hotels, and we realized that if we could just have casinos in each of those hotels, we could probably make more money than anything else, and we pretty much sold our soul and got involved in the casino business, ultimately getting to 17 different casinos, and all of that clearly before I knew who Christ was. And then I had an opportunity to go down to Ogden, Utah to buy another hotel. I did go down there, got very, very involved in that project, was commuting back and forth to it a lot. I could never get the local newspaper to run an article about me and the work we were doing on this historic hotel. It's an old 13-story grand old lady hotel that we thought was worthy of at least saying that something was happening there. And finally went to the newspaper, and I handed them the information about it and renderings of it and picture of myself, etc. And they I said, well, we'll put something in. And about 6 weeks later, I open up the newspaper, and there's a picture of me on the front page of the newspaper that was not the picture I gave them, but a DUI picture that I had gotten when I got incarcerated. One of the times I was a full alcoholic at that time, and the article was really not about the hotel, it was about my life. And it said that, I was, literally said I was an alcoholic, that I had frequented all these bars in Utah at that time in 1983. That had more impact than it would have had today. It said that I was involved with the mafia down in Las Vegas, and it went on to go through some other things that were not particularly nice, and it really infuriated me. I literally went down to my attorney, and I said, I'd like to sue this newspaper for everything they have. And he said, I read that. I think that you've got an incredible case. He said, what stuff in here is not true? And I said, well, it's all true, but they shouldn't be able to put it on the front page of the newspaper. And at that point, he wouldn't be my attorney anymore. And I feel you hit rock bottom when an attorney won't come alongside of you, I think. So, but that day that was really a disastrous day turned out to be one of the probably better days of my life. That not that things went downhill from there, but there was a group of men in the city there that were part of Christian Businessman's Committee, CBMC, and they started praying for me after seeing the article. They had this 10 most wanted list for God, and they put me on the top of that list, and they started inviting me to outreaches. Over the next 3 years, they invited me to around 24 outreaches. I turned them down 23 times, and finally a gentleman came to me and he said, Dan, if you'll come to this one, we won't ever ask you again. And so I said I would. The speaker was Adolph Coors, happened to be the beer I was drinking at that time, and thought that sounded interesting. And when I heard Adolph Coors speak, and he was having some things going on in his life that were similar to mine, I accepted the Lord as my Savior that day in Ogden, Utah. And they have you sign a paper that says, I prayed with the speaker, and I've accepted the Lord, and I signed that and checked it, and says, would you like someone to visit you in your office? And I checked no. And got back to the office, and I was about as confused as maybe you can be at that time in my life. And about 1:30, Adolph Coors and the couple guys from CBMC knocked on the door. And it turns out they come to your office whether you check that box or not. And these Christians are a sneaky group of people, I can tell you. So, and they said, we'll stay here and answer any questions you have. We'll stay here as long as you want. I had so many questions. I had no idea what I'd done. I really didn't understand what I'd done. And at somewhere around 7 or 8 o'clock, we sent out for pizza. At about 11:30 that night, I had figured out just that everything I was doing in my life, the darkest side that you could possibly have in so many different areas, was wrong. And I really didn't understand that before. I just didn't understand that any of those things were bad. And as I came to that understanding, I was just literally in tears, and they were there beside me. And because of that, I ended up just really having a group of men around me that were indispensable. And I literally moved our company down to Utah and to be around Christian men. Not a lot of people move to Utah for Christianity, but that is what I did. And when you're in Utah, you kind of do like the Utahns, so we had another baby, our sixth, and we wanted to kind of look like the community, I guess, and Catherine was born, and we then realized, gosh, where are we going to educate her? Utah was there was only one state that had a worse education system than Utah. It was Arkansas. You don't want to be next to Arkansas, really, and so we decided, why don't we just start a Christian school? There are no Christian schools in our area, a population of about 500,000 within a 10-mile radius, And that really is the project that has had more impact on my life than any other project that we'd ever done before and any project that we've ever done since. And I'm just going to explain some of the reasons for that and what happened and what was involved in it. We started in 1991 and we started raising money. Had no idea what we were really doing. I was a fairly young Christian, about 5 years into Christianity. And over the next 3 years, we were able to raise about $13,000. And that wasn't quite enough to do an entire school and build a building and all the things that had to do with it. God had put on our heart to build a 43,000 square foot building. And we needed 5 or 6 acres of land. And we got into December of 1994, and Catherine was going to be going to kindergarten. One of our other children was going to be a sophomore in high school. And the school system that she was in was awful, and we just really wanted to get this building built in 1995. And Claudia and I realized that we hadn't really given to the project. We were out asking everyone else for money, but we hadn't really committed yet, and had this concept that if we committed, maybe everybody else we knew would too, which, by the way, is a really bad concept when you get into it. So we prayed about what we should give, and God put on both of our hearts that He wanted us, not our money. And we did something very unusual for me, and it was a real step of faith, but I met with my office staff. I said, I'm going to take a year's leave of absence and just work on getting this school done. I literally don't want you to call me. I'm not going to come in. I want you to make all the decisions. I don't care how the business does right now. I just want to spend a year just committed to do this. In reference to what you're doing, I really was all in. And they were in a little bit of shock, but that's how it happened. I moved my stuff out of the office into my home. I was really excited to go into the year, and I felt like I'd developed a lot of different things. I should be able to develop a Christian school. And here's where we were at in January of 1995, and we had decided to open this building in September of 1995. We had some obstacles, without any question. We didn't own any land to put the building on, and we didn't have any teachers or staff or any of those kind of things, or administrator. We really didn't know where the school was going in a lot of ways. We had $13,000, and we had about 6 couples that were involved in wanting to do this. But on the positive side of all of that, we had a vision from God that we just couldn't get out of our minds. And it was to build a school for about 400, and that's what 43,000 square feet does, and have grades from kindergarten through 12th grade and really go impact people in that community. And I started looking for land. I found the ideal piece of land, about 6.5 acres in the easiest city to build in our area, where I had done an awful lot of projects for the city, and we had designed and built their police station, their fire department, their community center, their senior citizen center, and I knew them well, and I knew it was an area we could work in very, very well. And so we found this land. It was in an ideal location in reference to everyone from different cities around that getting to it. And I approached the man that owned it and told him that we would like to buy that, which was really a pretty dumb thing to do when you think about it, when you're trying to buy a piece of land that's probably worth $1 million and you've got $13,000 in the bank and no real potential to get from here to there. And so I'm there talking to him, and he said, well, we're going in for a rezone in 2 nights before the Planning Commission and the City Council, and I've already talked to them, and they're kind of in my pocket. They've agreed to vote for it, and it's going to happen, and there isn't any other option. And I said, well, what if they turn it down? And he kind of jokingly said, well, if they turn it down, I'll sell it to you for what it cost me. And I said, that's great. And I left, and I started praying about the city council and turning it down. And it's the first time in my entire life I ever wanted a project to be turned down, because that's what we do for a living, is build buildings. And So I called the city manager, who I knew very, very well, and I said, what's going to happen on this thing? And he says, oh, that's going to get approved. He said, the city council really wants it, and it's a good tax base, good sales tax, and that is definitely going to get approved. And so I went to the meeting that night, and the meeting was a planning commission. The planning commissioners were the city council members. That's how small this town was, about a town of 10,000. They appointed themselves as the planning commission. And then after the planning commission meeting, the city council would, the same exact people had to vote on it again. And there was one lady there in the planning commission that clearly did not want that to happen. And there were 4 people that clearly wanted to have it happen. And that's how it voted, was 4-1 in favor of it. When they asked for input from people in the community, no one showed up. And we just about always have these people we call cave people show up to those meetings. That's an acronym for Citizens Against Virtually Everything. And but they didn't show up. There was no opposition to it. I didn't feel like it was very right of me to go and oppose it, so I didn't say anything, obviously. And there was about a 20-minute break, and then the city council met. First item on the agenda is to approve what the planning commission had recommended. And this same lady that was against it, she says, I'd like to make a motion that we do not approve that. And this guy seconded it, and he says, I'm just going to second it so we can discuss it a little better. And there was no discussion. Nobody wanted to, even the lady that wanted to discuss it didn't discuss it. And so the mayor called for a vote, who's in favor of denying this request, and 4 of the 5 city council people raised their hands, and it was defeated. And to everybody's amazement, I went to each of those people. I, again, knew everybody pretty well. And the next couple of weeks after this, I went to them and said, why did you vote against your own resolution you approved 45 minutes before that? And they each told me, except for the lady that was clearly against it, but they each told me that they had no idea. They looked and their hand was up, and they didn't even realize it was their hand. They just were... They said it's just unknown why it was. And I said, well, I think I know what it was. And I told them what was happening, and that God had something else in plan for the land. Well, the next day I had gone over to the developer and told him how sorry I was that he didn't get his zoning request. And I said, but will you sell that to me at what it cost you? And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I said, well, you did tell me that you were going to do that. And he said, and he looks at me and he thinks for a minute and he says, you know what? That city deserves a Christian school in that area. I'm going to go ahead and do that for you. And he calls his secretary. He said, would you find out how much we paid for that? I'm going to sell that land to these guys. And she says, well, we've owned that for like 30 years. And it was all in farming. And turned out that he had paid $78,000 for it, and it was worth well over $1 million at that time. The only problem we really had is we didn't have $78,000. I had called my wife and said, boy, we got the land. And she says, well, where are you going to come up with that money? And so we called probably 30 or 40 of our friends. We had a little banquet. We told them the need. About $95,000 in cash came in that evening, and we were able to close the land and really finally have the missing piece to be able to tell somebody this is where it's going to go. This is in March of 1995, and a newspaper reporter was there, and I talked to him afterward, gave him a rendering of the building that we had designed, and I was so exuberant it just kind of got away from me, and I said, yeah, we're going to start construction. We're going to open this in September. And if you go to stupid things you do in your life, that would add up to be right near the top of where that was at. And first of all, it takes about a year to build a building like that, and you really do need money to be able to do those kind of things. And we didn't have time or money in that case. And that article turned out to be the second big article I had on the front page of the newspaper, and this one was quite a little bit better than the other one, but almost as disturbing to me when I read it and realized that everybody thinks we're going to have this building done in September. And a couple of people called me that were subcontractors that I knew, and they said, Dan, we see you're doing the school. We'd sure like to be involved in it. And I said, that's great. I do have to tell you, we don't have any money. And the one guy that was doing the earthwork, he said, oh, Christian schools never have any money. He said, I was raised in a Christian school and down in the South, and he said, this will be my way to give back. I'm just going to donate all the earthwork, which was a significant donation. And as I prayed about that, I thought, gosh, why don't we just go ahead and start? And we'll just go until God stops us. And so we dug the hole, and we went to some concrete people, and they gave us a donation of concrete, and some other people gave us rebar, and we put in the footings and the foundations, and we were able to pour the slab. But it was all difficult work. We hadn't actually spent any money at all. We still had a little bit left over from the overage in the area, and we had our $13,000. But we got all the footings, foundation, and slab poured without even writing a check. But it took a long time because it was raining so hard that spring. And we live in the desert. We get an annual rainfall of about 8 to 10 inches of rain in an entire year. We had 23 inches of rain in that 6 and 7 week period of time right there. And we were in a farmer's field besides that, which was about 12 inches of topsoil, which really became a muddy mess. And we got to the point, it was July 8th of 1995, and we had the slab all poured, and we had mud everywhere still, and other general contractors around me said, Dan, you are just kind of gone nutty. I think we're going to have to take you to the guys with the white coats here. You're telling everybody you're going to have this building done September 5th, less than 2 months from now, and it's a 43,000 square foot building. You just got the footings and foundation and slab poured. And I did realize that I had gotten way ahead of God, and in fact, I'd been ahead of God the whole time probably, and called a meeting of my board at my home. The reason I remember it was July 8th is that happened to be our anniversary of our marriage, and I had called Claudia and said, we're not going to be able to go out tonight. I've got to meet on this school thing, and these guys are going to meet at the house, just 2 other guys. And then I got working on the project and got there late, walked into the living room. They were there. We sat down. I said, can't get this done. We're going to have to be September of 1996. And we prayed for about 2 minutes, decided that was right. We all voted to wait until then. And I had the sense of relief like you can't even imagine. It was finally out in the open that we weren't going to get it done. I could go tell everybody we weren't going to have it done. And I felt like we've now got enough time to structure it in and perhaps get it done by September of the following year. And then I went out in the kitchen to get some coffee, and my wife was there, and she said, did I hear you say you're not going to have school done in September? And I said, yeah, it can't be done. It's impossible. And she said, well, where are Catherine and Amanda going to go to school? And I said, well, Amanda's going to have to go where she went last year, and Catherine, it's just only kindergarten. And that was the second big mistake I had made that night. The first being canceling our dinner, and the second being my statement towards kindergarten. And Claudia got really, really close to me, which she does when she wants me to remember something or to understand something. About that far, frankly. And she looks at me and she says, you have been following God like I have never seen you in all the time we've known each other. And she said, I've just been so proud of that, and we've watched so many miracles so far today. Look at where you've got. It hasn't even cost anything. The land, the concrete, the materials, the suppliers, the people that have gotten involved. You've had this front row seat to watch God work. You've been excited to get up every morning. You can't wait to get to the job. And you've been following God. Now, who are you listening to now? Are you listening to God, or are you listening to Satan? And it brought incredible tears to me. I walked back out in the living room. I said to the guys, I think we just told God what we wanted to do and didn't ask him what we should do. And we got on our knees and we prayed, and we prayed and we prayed. And when we got done, I said, what do you guys want to do? And they said, well, we think we need to finish this and open it September 5th. And I just had a calm about it. and I don't even know why, but it just seemed like God had said, I'm here for the impossible. I can be part of that. And that's exactly where everybody else was at. And one of the guys who was the president of Thiokol says, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go down to the bank in the morning and I'm going to set up a $300,000 line of credit that you can draw upon. Go get going as much as you need to go get going, and let's go get it done. And I said, well, I'm going to go over to Anderson Lumber, who I'd been to on 4 different occasions and asked for things, and they'd given me little things, but I had also asked them for building materials for the shell of the building, and they did turn me down on that. And I said, I'm going to go ask them again. And so the next morning I went over to Anderson. I laid out the plans again. I said, I'd really like to get some of these framing materials. We've got to get started, or I've got some money now. Could we get a discount on it? What can we do? And they went in the back room, came back about a half hour later and said, we really are behind what you're doing. We're just going to donate all of the frame materials, including the roof trusses and plywood and all the walls, everything that was in there, for nothing. And then I went back, and in fact, when we were praying the night before, I really came to me that if we were going to get this done in less than 60 days, there was somebody in the Bible that did that by the name of Nehemiah, and he had rebuilt the walls. I had been to Jerusalem a couple of years earlier, and I had, because of being a builder, I think I had just retraced exactly what part of the walls he rebuilt and the gates and the different things he had. And the amazing part to me was not that he did that as much as how fast he did it. And I started really reading Nehemiah differently and saying, what was in there that showed us how to do things, and realized that the Bible has a way of doing these things that's way different than the world and the way that we approached it. Just to give you an instance, when he talks about rebuilding the gates, he had different people that lived closest to the gates rebuild that gate, and other people doing another gate. And he had all the gates under construction at the same time. In our world of construction, we go to a gate builder and we say, you got a contract and you got to build all the gates. And we took that pretty seriously, and I started calling up people I knew and said, would you help frame this? I need to have you frame about 1/6 of it. And another 1/6, and we had 6 framing contractors. We ended up with 7 or 8 electrical contractors and plumbing and mechanical. And to a superintendent, which happened to be me at the time, probably about as big a nightmare as you could possibly have is to have all those different companies interacting with each other and where they were at. And I couldn't figure out how that part was going to work, and it just turned out to be not even an issue. It just ended up being just no calamity whatsoever. But watching the job was like watching time-lapse photography. Every day, so much was accomplished that you couldn't even imagine. And the building inspector came up to me, and he who was a good friend, and he said, Dan, there is no way I can keep track of inspections. And we didn't even have the money to pay for the permit. We hadn't ever even paid for the permit. And he said, you just go ahead and finish the building, and when you're done, I'll come and give you an occupancy permit. And so we kept going. God kept bringing people. We kept watching miracles. We kept watching people do unordinary things. And we got the building up pretty well, but the one thing we could not get was the roofing. We had, in all the storms we had, there was a lot of winds, and it destroyed about 1/4 of the roofs in our town. And there was just no labor. No one was doing it. They were all working on insurance work, and we had been praying about who could do the roofing. And one day and it was at a critical stage, and this man walked in the trailer, and he said, I was told to come and talk to you about a roof. And we said, who are you? And he said, well, I'm from, I've actually forgotten, either North or South Carolina, and I don't remember which one it was, and he said, we came up here, me and my 4 sons, because we knew there'd be work, and we're here to do work. And I said, boy, we really need you. Can you do a job of this size? And he says, oh, yeah, we can get on it and stay on it every day until it's done. We won't work Sundays, but we'll work every other day. And I said, great, how much would that cost? And he said, oh, I couldn't charge you. There's just no way I could charge you for this. And he had come up to get work and then comes in and does this. And I said, who told you to come over here? Who did you run into? And he said, well, we were praying about it, and God just led me to come over here. And it was those kind of things happening, just almost a daily time of wondering, I wonder what you're going to do next, God. You're in control. We are not in control anymore. All we're doing is hanging on and watching in an incredible way. And the job, I would like to say, got done on September 5th. It actually didn't. We were a week late. We opened on September 12th. We had 167 kids the first year, from kindergarten through 12th grade. Somebody was in every grade. The staff came. We had an incredible education program that turned out to be one of the best in the city. And as a result, within 4 years, we'd grown to 400 kids. We built 2 more rooms onto the building in order to accommodate more, and then 3 years later, in 2002, we built a new 65,000 square foot junior high school across the street, and within the next few years grew to over 1,000, and saw many people come to know Christ. We were an outreach school. We witnessed to Mormons. We did all kinds of things of that nature. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, the state started putting in charter schools. Just in our area, they put in over 50 charter schools. And 2 things really happened. The parents changed that were Christian parents that just were going to church and loved God and wanted their kids in Christian education. That new group of parents is the millennials we have that don't go to church, and they really don't put their kids in Christian education. And we watched enrollment drop. We watched many of the parents say we can have free over here in the charter schools, and we dropped enrollment to about 150 or so and couldn't maintain those buildings. And so we ended up selling them to 2 different charter schools, generated almost $12 million net when it was all said and done, and has been now funding Christian ministries in that area. Just recently, we gave a $150,000 grant to Pregnancy Care Center to buy a new color sonogram systems, and it has really had a legacy that lives on, even though the school didn't do that. And frankly, it happened because God willed it to be done. We had this front row seat to watch God work. At the end of the project, a couple of months after the project, I felt like we should do a banquet and thank all of the people that were working on the job for what they had done. While we were building the building, we started having lunches, and we started doing a lot of things for the workmen, and we saw 5 or 6 people come to know Christ during the construction. But we had this banquet. We had over 200 of the different people come to the banquet. We showed slides of the project from the beginning to the completion. We showed slides of the kids and what happened as that had opened, and it was really a great night. When I was speaking, I had no desire to do an altar call. I hadn't even thought about it. I'd never done one in my entire life, but God just spoke to me that it's time to ask these people if they'd like to know who the Jesus is that we know, because almost everyone in the room were Mormon. There's very, very few of the businesses in our community that are not LDS owned. And I did give an altar call. We saw 27 men come forward and accept the Lord that evening, and realized that we're not just building buildings, we're building lives, we're changing lives. When men accept the Lord in Ogden that are Mormons, they commit business suicide. Literally, it's very, very difficult for them to continue on once they've left their wards. And those men today are some of my best friends that I have in that area there. I look back on all of that, and I parallel some of that to Nehemiah. Certainly don't put us in any classification with Nehemiah and his strength and his wisdom and his faith, but they are both stories of faith. I had really committed, and I really was all in, and I remember my wife saying, how can you go over and build a 43,000 square foot building, and where are you going to get people to come and help? And we don't have enough friends. If all of them were there, we couldn't do anything. And I said, I really don't know, but I know one thing. I'm going to go over there every day, and I'm going to just work with my hands. I'm going to do what it is, and if nobody comes, then it's just going to take longer. She said, well, how much longer? And I said, I don't know, probably 150 years or something, but I'm committed to doing it. We're just going to stay there till it's done. And but people did come, and people did come forward. Nehemiah went there by himself. He didn't know if he could get anybody to work with him. He's working with people that are downtrodden. They didn't have any desire to do anything whatsoever. Their town had been destroyed. They had become literally slaves to the kingdom, working in the fields, giving everything back, leading a pretty terrible life. And here's some guy that was a cupbearer saying, follow me. And they did follow him, and they did do things. The reading that you're going to be looking at this coming week is in reference to them trying to get Nehemiah's attention with Sanballat. Come and talk to me. And Nehemiah said, I can't come down. I'm doing important work. I must stay here. That was the attitude that we had over there. We aren't going to let anything get in our way. We're just going to go forward because God is willing to do that. And we had little going for us, except we had everything going for us, because if God is with us, who can be against us? And that's exactly what we saw. We watched the faith of the people that waited to put their kids into the school. I think they had more faith than we had sometimes that would be done, and didn't have another solution for where those kids were going to go, as the people in Jerusalem had the faith in Nehemiah that you're going to be able to get this taken care of. And they paralleled as they went along, and I think it's such a incredible time to go through that story and to be able to tell people about that. But the story of Nehemiah is a great story. It's an incredible part of the Bible that I've probably read 300 or 400 times, and I love to read it. But can you imagine what would have happened if you were there? That would have been a completely different situation to have witnessed it firsthand and to be part of it. Reading the story is not the same. When I would tell people the story of what happened at Christian Heritage as we started the school and years after, and even now as I'm telling you, it's a great story. It might be an inspiring story, but nothing like being there, being part of the group of people that were there to see it happen, to feel it, to have a front row seat to watch those miracles happen. It's a completely different story in that area. It's like your mission trip. I heard stories this morning, and I'm just thinking, man, that is neat. I just can't believe what they've accomplished and where it's at. I remember praying about that when I was here the last time, and your mission trip, and that many people going. How are you going to handle it? What are you going to do? And we are going to hear a lot more about that, I'm sure, but we only hear the story. The people that were on the trip had a whole different experience that changed their lives in a whole different way. You, as this church now, have got a part of a story that is unbelievable to be part of, and that's to take this 15-year temporary quarters that you've been in, that you've been stranded in these areas, and I look at the setup and the takedown and the things that your group does and the way this is set up and seeing it all today. It's unbelievable how much work goes on behind the scenes so that people can come here and be part of this. And they've done it for a lot of years, for a lot of time. And now have the option to be able to see a new story evolve as you come into that. One that I believe God is inspired through a vision that's one of the strongest visions of anything we've seen around the country. The chance that this will go forward, if people have faith and if people will participate, if everyone comes all in, as we have to and where we're at, is 100%. There is no reason. We have seen so many miracles already on how the land was accomplished in a way that was literally impossible. I was here several years ago looking at land, looking at buildings, trying to come up with ideas, and I went, I don't see any possibilities here. I don't see where it's going, and yet come back this time and through different people in the church and the different linkages that were here, they were able to find land that just works incredibly well and at a price level that nobody could even imagine, giving the church some incredible equity as they go into that. The favor has been there in so many different ways, and it's again, so incredible to watch what is going on. And I think it's just a fraction of what we're going to see over the next period of a year and a half, as we see something accomplished that we can't do except God willed it to be done. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people's lives are going to be changed in the process. Not only the lives of the people here that are involved in that project, you're never quite the same. You're more alive in seeing those things happen. But the thousands and thousands of people that are going to be impacted by this over the next 40 or 50 years as this project just continues to provide into the community. People that aren't even born yet are going to be impacted way more than the people that exist here today. And you get to be that foundational group. I'm excited about that, and I just so highly recommend that you don't get to the point that you hear that story, but you didn't take that time to participate in it. There's so many ways to get involved, so many ways to see what God is going to do. And I so much encourage you to very much be part of that. I'm going to show you a couple of slides of some newer renderings that we've done, and just explain the project just briefly here. This is the entry into the third space lobby area and worship area. This worship area holds about 800. The lobby will accommodate the entire staff, but the worship area also is available as a real community facility that'll be used when it's not being used as a church for a whole variety of community uses and things that happen. It's got a drive-under canopy. Parking is very accessible to where that goes, works out well. Second picture really shows the, they're not in the order that I thought. There they are. It really shows the youth area with a two-story playground. We wanted that with a large glass area in front of it to keep it lit even at night with LED lighting so that people see that how much we really care about those little kids. And it's a 5-star rated youth or children's area that is really exciting beyond means to be able to have those things that we would have. One reason we put so much emphasis into kids areas are that we're really trying to get more and more millennials back to church. And children's areas do that. We've seen that in churches across the country for the last 5 or 6 years as we've put a large emphasis on children's areas, and they work out well. In addition to that, that would be a daycare during the week from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, Monday to Friday. We did a daycare analysis that was done by a professional group, and it showed the unbelievable need for that in the community, and it also provides more and more people to the site, more and more people that we can reach out to, and sustainable income to be able to make this complex happen and create less and less need for funding in the church, allowing the tithing of the church to be able to reach out into the community and reach far more people, do more missions, be more involved in what we're trying to do when we reduce our overhead. And the third picture really shows the hotel proposed, around an 80-unit hotel, its own drive-in structure on the front of the land. That won't be a Starbucks, but we wanted to identify it as a coffee area, and one that will again have a place to be able to informally start to impact people's lives as they come in for coffee and what they're trying to do and do that. Again, we did an independent hotel study that was done by an independent company, showed that this is one of the best markets in the entire United States. And the needs and the ability and what this can do from a sustainable area is really strong. My partner Eric is going to be here next week. Eric has been a pastor for the last 29 years. He did about 12 or 13 years of that pastorate out of a hotel. And during that process, saw something in excess of 4,000 people come to know Christ through that ministry and what was going on. At one point, 4 or 5 years ago, that hotel burnt down and that ministry got destroyed, and he had brought his group into another church over there that we had designed, and I got to know Eric and what his skill levels were and what he did, and I was just, he really understood this business incredibly well, and I said, finally, after about a year of being around Eric, I said, why don't you come and do something really important with your life? And talked him out of being a pastor. And and I said that in some jest and some reality, and Eric has now come back and told me that he said, that was kind of a funny thing you said, but I've been able to do more ministry in the last couple of years with BGW than I did the last 28 years before that, because he's really been out speaking to churches and showing churches how to do sustainable things and impacting lives as he's gone through that process on a nationwide basis. And I just love Eric. It's his birthday today, and he'll probably be watching this, so happy birthday, Eric. And I just want to encourage you to look at what's in front of you. Don't miss it. Be part of it. It's got a short shelf life, and you won't be sorry. Thank you very much.
Dan, thanks for being here. Check. There we are. No. I'm really glad that God crossed our paths, and just grateful for your leadership. And it's just really encouraging to hear the journey that God's brought you on, and most of us know the journey that God's brought us on as a church, and just looking forward to seeing how God intersects those paths for His glory. This series is all in, and we're asking you to really go all in. For some of you, you know exactly what that's like because you got a snapshot of what that's like this past week. It's some of the special nature of a mission trip is you kind of carve out the time, you make a plan, you set aside work, you set aside responsibilities, you leave family members or whatever, or you take them with you, whichever one you did, and you say, I'm all in for this week, and you kind of segment yourself off, if you will, so that you can dedicate yourself to what's ahead. And when you're all in, there is a freedom that comes with that, because you've kind of separated yourself. And then there's this freedom to be in this place together with others who are all in. And the dynamic of this past week, spend the night with 99 of your closest friends now, all in one big room, it's just kind of, there's a special nature to it. And you wake up together, and your lights out together, or mostly, and there's just a great sense of, hey, we're all in this together. It's really difficult, but at the same time, it's actually easier to do that on a mission trip because you've intentionally set that aside. What's maybe even more difficult than that is to be all in the natural flow of your everyday life. To be all in with the mission of God in your families, in your everyday household, in your work site and your jobs, and the people that you work around, in your apartment complexes, and in your classrooms at school. Like, it is difficult to say, hey, I'm going to be all in as I'm in the flow here. And that's what this project is really about. It's about it's about going all in so that we can have more opportunities locally to impact our community every day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. A sense that we have an opportunity to do something special here. And God has provided not only partners that have the experience and the right heart that our heart is, and the mission and vision that's the same as ours, but also just the opportunities that God has created along the way. So I want to announce one thing, and then I'm going to pray, and we're going to dismiss. And if you got some question and answer, we'll do that right up here afterwards. One of the things that we've done over the last couple months is just collected a group of leaders, all of the staff here at church, as well as the elders and their families, as well as some leadership teams that are specifically focused on this project, and whether it's doing the BE workshop or other parts of it. And we just asked them to fast forward the process. All we're asking each person to do is to spend time, invest time with God in prayer, and simply respond to what that conversation is. We've asked you to write down on a card, on a commitment card, in 2 weeks, what the result of that conversation is. And that's our goal. For the leaders, we've asked them to fast forward that process. And I asked them to have that to me a couple of weeks ago. We got it mostly done by the end of last week. And so that I could report to you guys where we're currently at. And so there's about 30 families on that leadership group. So it's a large group. And at the same time, where we're at after their commitments is this. So we have commitments of $640,000. Okay? 640, you clap for that. Of that $640,000, about $350,000 is committed to be given by April 17th. And so from a total project standpoint, we're about 2/3 of the way there, and we have about 1/3 of that committed to come in by April 17th in 2 weeks. And so that's just kind of to say, hey, this is where we're at. And I look at those families, and I am very grateful for their commitment and their sacrifice that says, yes, this is us going all in together. And now it's the time to say, hey, let's all do this. And I promise you, if we just all go to the Lord with it, the result has to be great. It really does. Like if we just all are individually faithful with that, no less, no more, then when we collect it together, we will honor the Lord with it. And so that's what we're asking. This is your commitment card. What we're asking is in 2 weeks that you would bring a gift, a commitment, a financial gift, or give online that represents the portion that you're going to do up front, and then a commitment here that is a commitment to give over the next 36 months, the next 3 years to this project. And so we'll just see what the Lord does. But we're down to 14 days. And so I'm praying every day for this project. I'm asking you guys to jump in here, get your journal, and just jump in this week. The prayer for this week is simply this. Let me move. Lord, open my eyes that I might see the world as you see it, and give me the words to tell others about it. And the question that we're asking you to take to God is, God, what keeps me from trusting you wholly, fully in difficult times? And what are you seeking to change in me? Because I think in the process, look, years from now, we're going to talk about this time. And I don't want you to miss out. Years from now, we're going to tell stories about this time. And people are going to want to know what it was like. And you have an opportunity to do that. And so don't miss out. Don't miss out. Go to the Lord, ask Him, and then jump in. Will you pray with me? God, I am grateful for your faithfulness. Even when we're not faithful, Lord, you proclaim and you declare that you are faithful. And that proves out over and over again, God. We're grateful, Lord, that you invite all of us into the plans that you have. God, that regardless of where we come from, regardless of what we've done, regardless of our past, Lord, that you have a plan and a purpose for our future. And we ask, Father, that you would help us to all say yes to your plan for us individually. And as we collect that together, God, that you would just amaze us by what you do in the process. Lord, we're grateful for the future that you call us into. We're grateful for the mission that has chosen us. And we ask, God, that we would say yes over and over again. We love you, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.